Rich appear to be getting richer, and it may be at the expense of everyone else. That's according to a new report. Let's take a look by the numbers. $465 billion. That's how much richer Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and the world's richest men got in the last 4 years, according to a new report from the UK-based charity organization Oxfam. That amounts to $14 million per hour. Oxfam says, on the other hand, nearly 5 billion people are poorer than they were 4 years ago. At least 1.7 billion workers across the world saw inflation rise at a rate higher than their wages.
Growing gap between rich and poor Americans is one of the biggest challenges facing the country. Get this, the richest 1% controls more wealth now than at any time in more than a half century. And that's a concern cited by every leading Democratic presidential candidate. And a recent bipartisan survey found that most Americans, 61%, think it's a problem.
Did you use that $916 million loss to avoid paying personal federal income taxes?
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes
if
me
he's
smart.
paid zero.
While the United States has the largest economy in the world, wealth inequality is a rapidly expanding issue that needs to be addressed. As shown in these graphs created by the Pew Research Center in 2018, over the past decades, income growth has been mostly focused on upper-income American families. Simultaneously, the middle class, which in past decades made up the majority of income distribution in the United States, has been shrinking. In addition, middle-class incomes have not been growing at the same rate that upper-class incomes have. There are many factors that contribute to this wealth inequality: wages, infrastructure, healthcare, and immigration, to name a few. While each of these factors plays a key role in the inequality that exists today, as the Taxing Committee, we are focused on presenting tax-specific solutions for this pressing issue. First, we will go over some of the most significant issues that exist within the United States' current tax system.
One of the most significant issues exists within American tax bracket parameters. As shown in this table made by the IRS, the current highest possible tax bracket for single filers is for those who make over $626,351 a year. Having this as the maximum possible tax bracket creates a situation in which the top single earners are paying the same tax rate as people who barely make over $626,000 a year. Because of this, these top earners are getting away with paying a relatively low rate, even though they have a much larger income than anyone else in the tax bracket. This is just the beginning. There are countless other loopholes that allow the top earners to pay an astounding low amount in taxes.
Another main flaw present in our current tax system is the use of capital gains tax against the standard income tax. Most top earners keep their money in capital gains, such as property and stocks. By doing this, they can use a tax loophole known as a deferral. This deferral occurs when someone reinvests their capital gains into other investments and does not take out any money for their own personal spending. This allows them to not pay taxes on those capital gains. Another way that capital gains can go untaxed is if they are kept unrealized. This is when someone chooses not to sell their capital gains and keeps them as stocks or property instead. By doing this, another loophole is created in which the top earners don't have to pay any taxes on those capital gains. As shown in this graph, created by the Center on Budget Policies and Policy Priorities, most of the capital gains earned by Americans as a whole go to the top 1% of earners. Therefore, the Americans that benefit the most from the specific loophole are the top 1% of earners.
This graph from the Tax Policy Center represents the problematic trend of decreasing maximum capital gains and income taxes over the past 70 years. Beyond decreasing maximum tax rates, there's also an issue in that income tax and capital gains tax are two completely separate tax systems that contrast each other. For example, the income tax taxes any income received from employment or self-employment. Income tax is taxed at rates from 10 to 37% depending on income. This tax is seen as a relatively progressive tax that generally gives lower income earners lower tax rates. Meanwhile, as shown by this table, the capital gains tax ranges from 0 to 20% depending on income level. This results in unequal tax rates between middle to low income earners and top earners. This is because most of the top earners get their money from investments while simultaneously utilizing these lower tax rates. Overall, the capital gains tax is considered relatively regressive because of its lower tax rate when compared to the income tax. It is also considered regressive because of how it benefits the top earners while not doing much for the lower and middle income earners.
Another loophole that top income earners use is trading stocks and other capital gain-like investments with hedge funds. A hedge fund is a large pool of money that only the top investors meeting specific financial and professional requirements can pull from. The first way that these contribute to low taxes is through the manager of the hedge fund receiving carried interest. This carried interest is a portion of the hedge fund manager's profit that they receive for managing the hedge fund. The carried interest they receive from managing the hedge fund is not taxed at the same rate as income tax, but is instead taxed as capital gains, which are subject to a lower tax rate than ordinary income tax. Another way that hedge funds lower taxes of hedge fund users is through the use of loans. By taking out loans for investments, hedge fund users can lower their overall taxes on those investments. This is because the interest paid on the debt of the loan is tax deductible. As a result, people involved with hedge funds pay less in taxes than they normally would if they did not utilize loans.
One of the main problems with American tax policies lies within the Social Security tax. This image from the Peterson Foundation shows that the Social Security tax has a maximum tax bracket of $168,600. This maximum allows high earners to pay a smaller portion of their wealth to the government compared to lower earners who end up paying the full and fair amount of the Social Security tax. As a result, the United States' Social Security tax is viewed as regressive when compared to other tax policies in the system. This is because high earners end up paying either the same Social Security tax rate or sometimes an even lower tax rate than lower income earners.
Another pressing issue with America's tax system is the lack of current wealth and tax data accessible to the public. Most research on taxes in the United States excludes the Forbes 400, or the 400 wealthiest people in the country. A lack of information on these 400 individuals leaves Americans in the dark when it comes to just how much the top earners are contributing to wealth inequality. Furthermore, with a lack of current and accurate data, the average American's understanding of wealth inequality has led to countless misconceptions. For instance, many Americans incorrectly perceive themselves as middle class, when most seem to actually fall into lower wealth brackets. This graph illustrates how the middle class has been collapsing since the 1970s. These misperceptions have led many Americans to blindly endorse political leaders and policies that worsen the wealth inequality that brings about their exact struggles.
Tax policies and systems of the United States have always been heavily tied into American politics. As recently as 2018, 29% of Republicans identified as working or lower class compared to 37% of Democrats. However, a recent shift in political affiliation has led to an even greater number of GOP voters identifying with the lower class. As of now, almost 46% of GOP voters identify as working class compared to 35% of Democrats, who have gained a higher percentage of middle and upper class voters. Despite countless voters from both parties agreeing on the need to raise taxes for the wealthiest Americans, Republicans are still far more likely to defend a regressive tax structure. These differences extend to capital gains and corporate tax rates, with Republicans supporting a 21% corporate tax rate versus Democrats lobbying for 28% or greater. The GOP's disapproval over raising taxes for the top 1% connects to how 58% of Republicans identify as traditional thinkers, compared to only 19% of Democrats. This connection is especially evident when we remember past leaders of the GOP, such as Reagan, who implemented trickle-down economics, which gave tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy. However, bipartisanship can be found in how wealth inequality limits the opportunities of all Americans and gives the ultra-wealthy too much political influence. Furthermore, a majority of Americans from both parties believe that major changes must be implemented. In other aspects of agreement across parties, 69% of registered voters in 7 swing states say they favor higher taxes on billionaires, as well as higher taxes for incomes over $400,000 by the same margin. Now, Trump has been elected thanks to winning 66% of the white working class vote compared to Harris winning 32%, as well as winning a larger share of working class Black and Latino voters than he did in 2020. As seen by this graph made by Blueprint, Trump supporters and Republicans as a whole do not seem to be concerned he would ever raise taxes for working and middle-class Americans, despite his newly released tax proposal shown in this graph from the ITEP, which clearly aims to provide tax cuts for the rich and raise taxes for every other wealth bracket.
Okay, moving on, all of the issues that we have outlined so far create a situation in which the widening of an already massive wealth inequality is inevitable. Especially with our incoming president's immensely regressive tax plans, it is necessary that we focus on implementing solutions that eliminate or reduce the effects of these specific issues.
One policy that has been tabled for the last decade is the Buffett rule, proposed by former President Barack Obama and named after Warren Buffett, a billionaire who famously paid fewer taxes than his secretary. In this table by the Center for American Progress, Buffett's past ability to avoid fair tax rates is evident. The Buffett rule would require any households making over $1 million a year to be taxed no less than 30% of their income. Implementation of the Buffett rule in the United States is estimated to generate $36.7 billion each year.
Currently, capital gains are taxed anywhere from 0 to 20%. These rates are much lower than income tax rates, which can go up to 37%. Because of how often the top earners utilize these capital gains taxes, we have concluded that raising the tax on capital gains could help balance out the wealth inequality in America. We believe that if the capital gains tax was raised to a maximum rate of 37% to align with the maximum income tax rates, the wealth inequality between the top earners and the lower and middle class would even out. If the capital gains tax is raised to a maximum rate of 37%, it is estimated to generate an extra $481 billion each year.
Another more radical solution that has been gaining traction in recent years is the idea of a wealth tax, specifically one targeting the ultra-wealthy. A wealth tax is imposed on an individual's net wealth or the value of their total owned assets and is separate from their regular income. A wealth tax proposed by politician Bernie Sanders specifically targets the top 0.1% of Americans or anyone who earns over $32 million a year. This tax would affect wealth and assets over the $32 million base, meaning if someone made $32.5 million, only the excess $0.5 million would be taxed under this policy, at a mere rate of 1%. As shown in the graph, the rate at which wealth would be taxed under this policy would increase similar to the way tax brackets work. At the top end of this policy, households making over $10 billion a year would be taxed at 8%. If implemented, this tax policy is projected to raise over $4.3 trillion in the next decade. While this number is very intriguing, there are many criticisms of this specific tax plan and wealth taxes in general. For one, many argue that even if a wealth tax was implemented, it would be logistically difficult to enforce. It would require increased funding to the IRS to evaluate individuals' assets and assess what is eligible to be taxed. Many also argue that making existing tax policies more progressive is an easier route. However, due to the overwhelming consensus to lower income taxes and other taxes, plus the regressive views of our incoming president, many people have shifted their attention to the highly radical, yet progressive, wealth tax.
Realistically, it would be difficult to implement and enforce these particular solutions all at once. However, it is important to acknowledge what could be achieved and improved upon with the additional tax money that the government would receive from these solutions.
As stated earlier, with the desire to implement these progressive tax policies, it would be absolutely necessary to allocate more funds to the IRS to help with policy enforcement and to help avoid a situation with hundreds of unprocessed refunds. As seen in this image, this new money would give the IRS all the resources and personnel necessary to do what they have struggled to do for years. Tax all eligible assets and gather more information about the distribution of wealth in our country.
With the money gained from these new tax policies, we would dedicate a considerable portion of the earnings towards growing the most vital programs in our country that aim to support low-income families. These programs still face problems by being underfunded, which limits their outreach and ability in providing basic necessities to Americans. The SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which only 55% of food insecure people qualify for, and the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8, are both federally funded programs which lack the extent of resources needed to provide widespread assistance. By increasing funding and outreach for programs like these, we can continue to expand social services nationally.
One main contributor to the United States' complacency with the regressive tax structures is a lack of understanding and education throughout the general public. Implementing mandatory taxation classes in high schools that spell out complex tax rules and regulations, the ways in which individuals with different socioeconomic statuses are affected by tax policies, and the ways in which they can participate and educate others in beneficial ways, would lead to fewer misconceptions of the United States' economy and would drive a shift in public opinion.
On behalf of the entire Taxing Committee, thank you for listening to our proposal.